Today on CityCast DC, we are talking election results, pet policies, and Pride Month with City Paper's Alex Koma and Hey DC's Kaela Cote-Stemmerman. Today is Friday, June 7th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Alex.
Hello. It's so good to be here.
And good to see you too, my friend. Hey, Kaela.
Good morning.
So, Alex, you have been covering the primary elections here in D.C., a bunch of D.C. council seats up for grabs. Can you walk us through the results? What is interesting, what's not?
Yeah, it was a pretty unsurprising night at the polls. It was a pretty low turnout election, which we were all expecting. And when that happens, you tend to see a lot of the incumbents, the people with name recognition and history in the city doing quite well. And that's exactly what happened. In Ward 2, we only had one person running in Brooke Pinto, so of course she won.
Ward 2 is the ward that includes Georgetown and a lot of downtown.
Ward 4, Janice Lewis-George winning in a walk over two opponents. Same goes in Ward 8 with Treyon White. Even Shadow Rep Oye Owalewa managed to win again an opponent Linda Gray, who some people thought had a decent shot of winning. So not the most exciting night for us political reporters, but definitely maybe an endorsement of what the council has been doing, I suppose.
But give us a read here. Like Brooke Pinto, as I understand it, she represents Ward 2. She is one of the more fiscally moderate, conservative members. She's made a big sort of anti-crime. She's someone who the kind of activist progressive groups view with great suspicion. So she is unopposed. No one even feels like they can knock her off to run against her. And Janice Lewis-George, Ward 4, which is Upper Georgia Avenue, Upper 16th Street, the part of Upper Northwest right to the west of Rock Creek Park, very progressive member of council, someone really viewed with skepticism by like Mayor Bowser and her allies and people who are more pro-business. She wins. She does face competition, but she wins very easily over that competition. So it's hard to get a read there. They seem to be going in different directions, but maybe there is one.
Yeah, well, that's why I framed it in terms of the voters coming out for the status quo, really. Of course, the status quo is very different, as you say, depending on where you live. The parts of the city downtown in Ward 2, they were the ones electing Jack Evans for all those years. So they do tend to be considerably more moderate. And so when they've got a candidate like Brooke Pinto, when the only person considering running against her was the aforementioned Jack Evans, yeah, you're probably going to be pretty happy with the job that she's doing. Then you look at Janice Lewis-George, that up in Ward 4, that is an area that's been changing rather aggressively with the way that, Petworth and areas have gentrified. That's going to mean that you're going to have a very different electorate than the one that was electing Muriel Bowser, Brandon Todd after her. And so really the way that I've been framing this election is exactly what I said to open this discussion, which is there just wasn't an upswell of interest. There was, even 4 years ago, when we had a competitive presidential primary on the ballot, everybody was stuck at home due to COVID, and maybe they had a little more time to pay attention to local politics. This is the type of race that we're used to seeing when there isn't the mayor at the top of the ticket, the council chair, the attorney general to turn people out. You have a low interest election, and that tends to benefit the people who can really organize because they've got the history on the council. And so it's hard to divine a big mood one way or another. So the closest guess we have is, maybe people aren't as upset about, say, rising crime rates as it might have appeared initially. At the very least, if they are, they're not punishing their council member over it.
Now, is that like a trend that, Brooke Pinto ran unopposed. A lot of these had maybe one, with sort of the exception of Ward 7, had one or two opponents. But we were talking to Mayor Bowser a couple weeks back, and she was like, when I ran for council, I was up against 15, 20, I don't remember the exact number, but different opponents. Is it in your time reporting, has that become a trend? Like, are there just less people running?
It's funny, I hear people complaining in both directions on this. So on the one hand, you have people taking a look at, say, the 10 candidates running in Ward 7, and they say, geez, some of these people just wouldn't be viable but for the Fair Elections Program, which is the new publicly financed election system that just went into place a couple of years ago that makes it a lot easier for a broader swath of people to run because you don't need to tap your network for these big $100,000 donations. You can raise small dollar donations, which are matched 5-to-1 by the government. And people say, well, that enables more people to run than would ordinarily. And this was a great source of tension in the Ward 7 race in particular. The other side of the coin is that, as you say, only 3 people running in Ward 4, in Ward 8. But perhaps that speaks to the strength of those incumbents. I mean, Robert White in the at-large race, we haven't talked about him. He wins easily, not even a really major competition. And a lot of people speculated to me that maybe after he ran against the mayor, there would be some people who were eager to try and at the very least make him sweat a little bit. All he draws for competition is a comedian in Rodney Grant, who doesn't do very well at all.
Robert White, another member of the sort of progressive bloc in the council. Meanwhile, Ward 7, which is mostly east of the river, some parts on the west side of the river, some parts of pretty deep poverty in Ward 7, also some middle class, sort of suburban style blocks. There were like a ton of candidates. And so it's one of these like nutty elections where like somebody literally could probably win with like 800 votes or something. And there is someone with sort of an insurmountable lead. Who is that person? Is there any kind of ideological valence or relation to like the big things DC's been talking about?
Yeah, so as best as we can tell, Wendell Felder is going to win this thing. We haven't had a race call, but he's got so many votes that based on the number of ballots remaining, most people tell me it is pretty hard to imagine him losing. So let's take a look at what he's all about. He has been walking this tightrope throughout this race of the fact that he, even though he's only 33, does have pretty deep ties to the DC political establishment. He worked for Mayor Muriel Bowser for many years. He's been the chair of the Ward 7 Democrats. He's been an advisory neighborhood commissioner for a long time. And so because of all that, he has a lot of support from the old guard in DC. He has Ward 7 Councilmember Vince Gray's endorsement, which was a huge factor in how well he did. But he has also been trying to appeal to, at the very least, reach out to DC's progressive bloc. There are a lot of people who I wouldn't have expected would be supporting Wendell, who tell me they see him as someone like a Kenyon McDuffie, someone who will challenge the mayor on occasion, but will also run in lockstep with her on some issues. And they're hoping that he can be that mix rather than the sort of rubber stamp for the mayor that someone like Lil Ruby May in Ward 8 or Brandon Todd in Ward 4 were broadly perceived to be. Now, really, the proof will be in the pudding. It's easy to promise independence when you're running for election and say all the right things to the mayor's people in order to get them to contribute to your campaign, which he seems to have done. So it's very much to be determined where this falls ideologically, but that is certainly the hope of the people who have supported Wendell Felder.
So here's my read and my rant, if you don't mind. I think it was really hard for people who are not like close, wonky followers of city politics to get what in any of these elections individually or the election in the aggregate was about. And I beg of people who run for office in DC, can you guys please make your signs better? There were so many signs around, but they all just had the person's name, like vote for Alex Koma, vote for Kaela, and nothing about what they stand for. And I think there are probably graphic designers who can figure out how to like put some sort of message of what you're about onto a sign, like lock them up or unlock them up or whatever you want. But it would really actually, for the non-close attention payers, which I think is a lot of people, it would help put things in relief and help you figure out what to do and not make it feel like a homework assignment.
Well, exactly as you say, a lot of these candidates didn't focus on the issues because they really didn't differ on a lot of them. To the extent that anybody did and made this a part of their messaging, perhaps not part of their signs, but their commercials, their mailers, was Ebony Payne, who is at the moment in second place and really surprised a lot of people with her performance because she focused on two things: Number one, she was extremely anti a new stadium at RFK. She represents the areas around the stadium site in Kingman Park. And so those are the people who are going to receive the most negative consequences of any new stadium. Naturally, they're most invested in preventing anything from happening there. So she makes this a big part of her campaign. And it seems to have worked. I mean, she won all of the precincts west of the river, which is very nearly good enough to get her the Ward 7 council seat with this many candidates. And the second thing is, you mentioned lock them up. I mean, all of the candidates agreed they wanted maybe a more punitive approach to crime than the city's currently pursuing, but she was extremely vocal about this very early on. She made this a centerpiece of her campaign, which was an odd pairing. A lot of progressives don't want the stadium, but they also don't want this sort of approach on crime. So she was trying to marry these two together, because if you're in Ward 7 and you're hearing shootings all the time, then you do feel more anxious and you're looking for someone to speak to that anxiety. And she was doing so. The problem with her is that she was running a very brash, very negative campaign. And that seems to have been a double-edged sword. It got her a lot of attention, but maybe rubbed some people the wrong way. I mean, you can imagine a world where maybe she managed this tightrope a little better, and we're talking about her instead of Wendell.
I do think one of the key issues about this race that's really interesting to me is the RFK stadium, because whoever does end up taking the seat is going to have a major vote in whether or not that goes through. So you went over a bit of Payne's view on that. What is Felder's view on that?
Boy, wouldn't I like to know. Just with his support of the mayor, and because the mayor is very supportive of RFK, he's had a tough tightrope to walk here. Sort of the stance he has taken, he has repeatedly said it's too early in the process to make any big commitments. He remains open to a stadium if the community is invested in it and wants it. And he has been generally pretty skeptical of public financing, which by and large, most of the candidates in the field were. The problem is that a lot of people find it hard to necessarily take that sort of stance when he has the number of ties to the mayor that he does. He has really worked hard to combat that perception. And so I imagine, given how well Ebony Payne did, he will feel that pressure to continue that stance, to walk more of a middle ground. But when push comes to shove, if indeed the city gains control of the site and is actually presenting an RFK stadium package to the council, it is pretty hard for me personally to imagine him voting against it. But we'll see.
Hey, one other thing that jumped out at me, it's a little bit off your city government beat, but the presidential primary election for D.C., Biden got about 87%, according to the latest numbers. And that write-ins, which I read as mostly anti-Gaza or protest votes, were 7.6%. I looked up the last time there was a Democratic primary with incumbent Democrats, 2012, when Obama was running for re-election. At that time, Obama got 97% of the vote, and there were 0.67% write-ins. But there also, this time, were about 80,000 votes, and last time in 2012, about 68,000 votes. So that's a pretty large difference in terms of the size of the Democratic electorate. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it is worth mentioning that there were maybe not the same sort of organized efforts as you've seen elsewhere around the country, but there were some organizers who were pushing for people to write in Gaza to make a statement to Biden. In particular, I believe the Hotel Workers Union, Unite Here Local 25, which is one of the more politically active ones in the city, one of the more influential ones, they endorsed people writing in Gaza. So you're not seeing necessarily a huge push on this issue, especially because there were so many local DC council races. A lot of the people who would be working on this were working on those. But I mean, listen, I've been in several DC council hearings where activists have shut them down, demanding the council pass a ceasefire resolution. I believe they did a demonstration just a couple days ago asking for the same thing. I mean, there are a lot of people who are concerned about this issue in DC. I mean, Kamon Freeman, he's a perpetual candidate, but he is challenging Eleanor Holmes Norton on the statehood Green Party line this year, essentially because she hasn't fought for a ceasefire resolution in Congress. I mean, it's maybe not to the same degree as elsewhere, but this same movement that's around the country is here too.
Let's be real, lawsuits are not fun, but with Paulson and Nace, at least they're a little easier. Paulson and Nace is a DC law firm in every sense of the word. It was founded here in 1979. Partner Chris Nace is a local who cares deeply about the DC community, even serving on the board of the local branch of the Living Classrooms Foundation in his free time. Nace and his associates Samantha Peters and Maya Perry handle medical malpractice, wrongful death, and other complex injury cases. And they don't just settle every case. They'll go to court. They'll fight for you. Paulson & Nace has even been recognized as one of U.S. News' best law firms. So if you have been hurt or lost a loved one because of someone else's mistake or negligence, call Paulson & Nace for a no-obligation consultation. Visit www.paulsonandnace.com. That's PAULSONANDNACE.com. Or call 202-463-1999.
Experience a live performance with premium seating at Warner Theater or the Fillmore Silver Spring. Live Nation Premium amenities totally change the concert experience with things like complimentary parking and private entry. Members also have access to in-seat wait service and exclusive food and beverage menus. Trust me, there is no better way to experience a live performance of a band, comedian, or even podcaster you love. Premium members get access and offerings before doors open to the VIP speakeasy-style 1924 lounge at Warner Theater and Vertigo Lounge at the Fillmore. Visit premium.livenation.com for more information or contact Mary Claire Griffin at maryclairegriffin@livenation.com or at 202-626-8255.
From the global to the domestic, our friend Mimi Montgomery at Axios had a piece this week which noted how there's a couple of jurisdictions in the region, DC and Alexandria, that have legislation pending about pets and housing. In DC, the aforementioned Robert White has sponsored a bill that would cap the pet deposit that landlords are allowed to ask for and eliminate breed restrictions. I'm not quite sure how to feel about it. I got a dog. I've written a book about dogs. I think if you're in politics, it's probably not a good idea to get on the wrong side of cute four-legged animals. On the other hand, in DC, we have a tremendous housing shortage. And I think, if I rented a place out, if I moved away and rented my house out, I think I might be leery that not every pet owner is as responsible a citizen as me, which is to say, since I do think we should do stuff to keep rents down, doing anything else that kind of has the potential of disincentivizing people from building or renting out housing seems like there's a cost there, and I worry about it.
That's interesting. I am definitely firmly on the less pet rent, less pet deposit side. I have a illegal cat here in my apartment. Don't tell management. I think it's a way, to make housing less affordable, to just have unnecessary fees that these big apartment buildings stack on top of rent. And it's just kind of a way to get people in the door and then charge them more rent. But I understand the landlord side of it. I do. I just don't think, you're talking like a couple hundred, $100 a month, couple $100 a month for a cat, for one dog. You're telling me they're going to cause that amount of damage in a year that you're going to need to replace? I think
that's like $1,200 a year.
It's not cheap. And then, the deposits can be, $600 up to $1,000, which seems a little excessive, in my opinion.
I think my favorite quote about this is I saw someone interviewed when Robert White did his rally outside of the Wilson building about this bill and talking about their dog. And they said, well, you wouldn't charge more for, an extra kid, and they're going to do maybe just as much, if not more damage to an apartment over the course here. I get it from the landlord's perspective. And for what it's worth, putting on my cynic's hat, they're lobbying against this, the various landlords association. So even this seemingly easy bill, you get the dogs out on the steps of City Hall and who could complain, is going to face some opposition. But yes, as you say, it is certainly a tool for landlords to charge more. Sometimes for good reason, but often because, as people have observed too, an easy tool for discrimination against people. If you say I don't want a pit bull in my my house. That is like a coded sort of line of thinking about like, ooh, which kind of people normally own pit bulls? Well, they're the type of people that landlords often don't rent to anyway in the city. So as you say, it's hard to change the really big problems with housing in the city. So maybe there's some virtue to taking on a smaller one.
On the other hand, it's incredibly annoying to live next door to a dog that yaps all the time.
Oh, me. Yeah.
And I think it's like reasonable to price that in. Like, okay, if there's a likelihood that this person will do things that are legal but wind up being very annoying and maybe making it harder to rent or keep tenants in the neighboring apartments, that we can attach an economic number to that.
But I think then at that point, you're free to choose an apartment that doesn't allow dogs. I feel like if you're in an apartment that allows dogs, then you should expect a dog or two.
They can still charge a fee. It's just what fee can they charge?
Right. We're just talking about limiting the fee, not getting rid of it completely.
The one thing that I think is like very good policy and important policy, and I hope gets embraced everywhere, is this idea that DC ought to have a shelter that's available to people with pets. They talk about it as for homeless. The bigger concern here, and there's data on this, is that like the number of people in like abusive domestic situations who don't leave because they're afraid they can't take their pet with them, and God knows what this abuser will do to the pet if I flee. That seems like a really actually important and good piece of public policy.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk to people who are in a homeless encampment and you're asking like, why aren't you in a shelter? Why haven't you pursued shelter? I mean, there are all kinds of reasons for that, but I will definitely say one that I've heard many times is I can't take my dog. And you might think at one level, you're like, this is something so small, but then you think about how you feel about your dog, and it's like, well, I wouldn't want to give them up either. So it's something that might seem like small and silly, but it does really have like real world impacts in like getting someone housing.
So Alex, what comes next with the DC thing?
Well, they've got to have a hearing on it. I mean, Robert chairs the housing committee, so I imagine he can advance that. I mean, the challenge will be seeing if there's a constituency to take this on among the rest of the council over the next few months. Much like Congress, nothing much happens before the election, so maybe now things will start moving forward. I think he said he wants to pass it before the end of the year, so we'll see.
Speed into success. Learn French. Much like a high-speed train, Alliance Française's immersive French language classes propel you towards fluency. Unlock a world of personal and professional possibilities when you become a member and learn French at the renowned Alliance Française chapter in DC. Tradition and modernity intertwine, offering you an unparalleled learning experience that includes language classes, cultural events, and the only French loan library in the Mid-Atlantic region. Embrace the language that bridges cultures and enriches your resume. The summer season starts on July 6th, so enroll today. All ages and levels are welcome. If you sign up by June 13th, you get $20 off the tuition fee. Find our French classes and more at www.francedc.org. The summer session starts on July 6th, so enroll today. All right, so Kaela, we are on the cusp of the annual Pride Parade. It is Pride Month. You are our Things to Do maven in the newsletter. So what's the parade this year? It's not going to DuPont Circle. That's wild.
Yeah, big changes this year. Obviously, all month, there's tons of Pride events going on, but this weekend is really the crux of it. You have the Capitol Pride Parade, you have the block party, you have the festival, and yeah, the big news is that this year it's not going through DuPont Circle, which is considered like DC's historic neighborhood, but instead it's just going to go straight down 14th Street and then hook left on Penn Ave towards the Capitol. It's a wider street. I think the thinking is there's more space for people to congregate. They're going to have these like seating sections, like these bleacher sections set up in a couple different places on the route, and you can actually pay money, like $5 to $25 to reserve a seat in one of those, which I think is very strange. But, you know, I can see if you're somebody who doesn't want to deal with the crowds, the heat, there's plenty of reasons that you might want to take advantage of those. And then, you know, at the end, there's going to be this big sort of 80s, 90s dance party that also has a entrance fee. So just be aware. The block party is still free. That is on 17th Street between P and R streets in DuPont. But yeah, so there's going to be quite a lot of changes this year. When's the last time you guys were at a Pride parade?
It's been a while, but it strikes me, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, but when you go down 14th Street, you take a left towards the Capitol. The marches to the Capitol or towards the Capitol tend to be much more like about political marches. And I had this theory of like Pride events, Pride Month, as like it had been obviously not very long ago, a very politically loaded event. This was a constituency within D.C. that was kicked around and brutalized and treated terribly by conservative politicians, ignored often by police and city government. A lot of that changed. There was same-sex marriage is legal. There was all kinds of things. And I had this theory, it was sort of evolving in a direction towards like St. Patrick's Day, right? Which is just, here's a nondescript identity group celebration. And no one's really against it because we've lost the memory of like when Irish people actually felt kicked around and so on. But, our politics since 2016 have changed. And there's a fairly good reason to re-establish the political element to it. Do you have any sense of whether that's what's going on, or is this just a matter of like convenient large avenues?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've talked about this a lot with my friends, how Pride has evolved, even in my time in DC in the last 7-8 years, is it has become a lot more corporate, right? Like it has these massive sponsors. Most of the floats are like Bud Light, but in rainbows. And a lot of people who actually want to celebrate queerness and political activism in the city are not going to this anymore, right? Like, it's not really that cool anymore to go to Pride. It's a really fun party. It's great, especially if you've never been, and everybody's out, and it's colorful, and it's celebratory. But if you are really passionate about that political side of things, this might not be the event for you. In fact, it might be more frustrating than not, I think.
But if you're into Bud Light floats.
But yes, if you're into Facebook and Bud Light floats, then this is the event for you, for sure. Not to be too cynical, I will be going. I think it is fun. It's a great way to celebrate queerness in the city. But just know what you're getting into.
Yeah, I think exactly to Mike's point, it's like it used to be a big deal, right? Which DC politicians in particular, because this event, for, as you say, even though we get the Amazon float now, it's fundamentally like still a very local DC event. It's like often the first time I encounter people who have like never seen the council chairman before or whatever, because now it's like a requirement. If you're in DC local politics, you gotta march in the Pride Parade. And it didn't used to be that way. It used to be like a very conscious choice about who was there and who wasn't. Like same-sex marriage was a live issue in DC politics like not all that long ago.
Hey, Alex, thank you so much for being here.
It is always my pleasure.
Kaela, awesome to see you.
Thanks, Mike.
And folks, if you love getting this kind of information on everything from Pride events to pet rules to local elections, consider becoming a member. For just $8 a month, you get first dibs on events we host, ad-free pods, and special extras. We have an event coming up in July, and members already have an email about it and can register. Head to membership.citycast.fm and pick the tier that works best for you. Thank you. And that, my friends, that is all for today here on CityCast DC. Our interim executive producers are Julia Karen and Kaela Cote-Stemmerman. Kaela also writes our super informative and fun newsletter. It's called Hey DC. Our interim producer is Ash Durbin, and our hosts are Bridget Todd and me, Michael Schaefer from Politico. Music is by Alex Roldan. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back Monday morning with more news from around the city. Bye.